Where do we leave off with early medieval? Okay. All right. We are going to finish early medieval today with Carolingian art and a couple of other things. All right. So I bet you're wondering, where is Carolingia? All right. The Carolingian Empire took up a huge portion of Europe. You can see it takes up most of or all of France and all of Germany, and it goes down um, into Italy and up north up here. So, quite a large empire, the Carolingian Empire. All right, and this guy right here is Charles the Hammer Martel. He was a military genius, and he fought against the Muslims coming in from Spain. He unified many Europeans against the Muslims, and he extended the border of the Carolingian Empire. His grandson is Charles the Great, also known as Charles the Bald, also known as Charlemagne. And Charlemagne becomes emperor of the Romans. He's trying to recreate the Roman Empire. By this time, the Roman Empire is a thing of the past, although it's continued on in its weaker form. But he's trying to MAGA the Roman Empire. I guess it's make Rome great again, Murga. All right. Anyways, um, he says mankind hasn't done well in Europe since the Romans. We gotta go back to that. Is basically what he's trying to say. He is the first unifier of Western and Central Europe, and this level of unification hasn't been done since the Romans, since Rome fell apart. All right, so we're going to look at this equestrian statue right here. He is wearing imperial garb, like this robe right here. You can imagine it would be purple if we could see it in color. And it looks very simplistic. It almost looks like a toy of Charlemagne. It doesn't look quite realistic. It's still a bit iconic. One of the interesting things is he has no neck. His hand is holding a globe. Remember what that implies? It implies that he rules the world in his mind. And also, look at the scale of him and the horse. Does he look like he's the right size for the horse? No. What's wrong? He's too big for the horse. That's right. So, the horse also means the same thing as it did before. The horse is a metaphor for the kingdom. So he is in control of the kingdom. He is riding the kingdom. He is the ruler of the kingdom. And I'm curious: is it stylized or is it bad craftsmanship? Uh, did the artist not know about scale, or did he do that on purpose? Because when you look at somebody riding a horse, that's the appropriate proportions of man to a horse. It looks like he's riding a tiny horse. Say that again. On the sculpture, yeah, just out of proportion. All right, if you look closely at his head, he has a fleur de lis. Yes. And this fleur de lis becomes the symbol of France. So anytime you see a king wearing robes that have fleur de lis on it, you know he's a French king. I also want you to know why this symbol is the symbol of France. This fleur de lis, it's a flower. Do you know what kind of flower it is? It is a lily. And a lily is a symbol of which biblical figure? That's right. It's a symbol of the Virgin Mary. So, this is a religious symbol, this fleur de lis, and it is a reference to the Virgin Mary. All right. It is also a reference to royalty. And let's see. Notice that he has no beard, but he has an epic mustache, just like our dying Gaul did. So it is a sign of nobility for the Franks or the French. And it also ties him to the tradition of the early Gauls. And then we can also compare his sculpture to that of Marcus Aurelius. And I wonder if he had seen the sculpture of Marcus Aurelius and said, I want my sculpture to be like that sculpture, with the feet hanging down below the horse, because both of them are way off. Anyways, hey, this idea of this equestrian sculpture as a metaphor for controlling the kingdom, it started with Marcus Aurelius, but it has gone on in history, and we see it a lot in art history. We have multiple cultures showing the king or emperor or ruler on top of a horse as a metaphor for ruling of the kingdom. And it's not just in Western culture, but we can see it in the Middle East and in Eastern cultures as well. And it happens a lot in art history. And it is still happening. Guess who this is? It's Vladimir Putin, shirtless, riding a horse. He is continuing the tradition of the equestrian as a metaphor for ruling the kingdom. And guess who that is? Yeah, he also is, and these are to do this as a level of hubris and narcissism. Even these older ones, this is a lot of narcissism. But wow. All right. Anyways, let's move on. All right. So I think we're going to finish up with early Renaissance or early medieval with this piece of architecture here. We're going to go to the Abbey Church of Saint Pantaleon, and we're going to look at this particular church right here. Now, is this a central plan or a basilica plan? It is a basilica plan. How can you tell? That's right. It is not an octagon or circular. All right, so it is not the plan of the church that we are interested in, but it is the facade of the church. All right, facade means the entrance. And what we are looking at is as we enter into the church, there are these two tall towers. In fact, if we look at just how tall they are, they're taller than the church. This entryway is the biggest part of the church, but it's not has nothing to do with the service of the church. Anyways, it's called a westwork, and we're going to come back to this idea of a westwork in the Romanesque and Gothic era. I want you to know what a westwork is. So, a westwork is the two tall towers at the entrance of the facade. All right, and that is it for early medieval. Any questions about anything we've covered so far? All right, let's move on. Let's go run through the art museum. Hello. We are in chapter 12 now. We're going to be looking at Romanesque art. This is a reminder on the next page, write chapter 12 at the top in the header, or you can write Romanesque art up at the top in the header. And then I want you to look at the page number, and then you're going to go to your table of contents, write the page number next to chapter 12. And this is also a reminder to make 5 quick little sketches as we run through the chapters. All right, so let's start looking at Romanesque art. Now let's look at the word Romanesque. Can you divide it up into 2 words? Yeah, Roman is the first word, and esque means it's like. So it's we're gonna look at art that is inspired by the Romans. It's Roman like. It's not Roman, but it looks like it's Roman. This is a movement from the 10th century onward to refer to Rome. Carolingian, the guy that we were just looking at on the horse, tried to revitalize Rome too. The Romanesque is so called because the medieval architects who designed these buildings used a fundamentally Roman architectural language. Romanesque churches are notable for their thick walls with relatively few windows, Roman archers, barrel vaults, and the use of massive vaulting. Romanesque churches appear heavy and comparatively dark. Gothic is the opposite. So between the fall of Rome, which is what, 410 AD and 1100 AD, there was not much in architecture. But in the year 1000 was the millennium, and people thought that the world was going to end. So there was no reason to build anything monumental. So there was an economic downturn. There was lots of wars, lots of plagues, and there was no incentive to build. But once the year 1000 passed and the world didn't end, people breathed a collective sigh of relief. Also, wars ended, an economic upturn happened, and people started to build again. All right, then the other thing I want to show you guys with this map, do you notice how all these arrows, all these red lines point to this one point at the tip of Spain? All right, there's a church here at the tip of Spain that everybody goes on a journey to visit. These journeys are called pilgrimages, which I'll talk about in a second. But so I just wanted you to see this map that shows that everybody from around Europe travels to this one church in Spain. Here's a closer view of that pilgrimage. All right, I want you to know what a relic is. How about I turn up the volume?
Medieval art history, relics and reliquaries. Before we get started with this video, it is important to note that many religions around the world have relics and reliquaries as a part of their faith. However, we will be focusing on Christian pieces for this video. A relic is the physical remain of a holy person or place. These objects were more than simple souvenirs or mementos. In the New Testament, objects touched by Christ or his disciples were imbued with healing powers of their own. Eventually, this belief grew to encompass any object or body part of a saint or holy person. They provided a tangible link between the human and the divine. Relics could be body parts, full bodies, pieces of clothing, personal objects, or even pieces of a landscape when the holy event took place. As long as a holy person interacted with the object, it could be a relic. The most valued relics are those associated with Jesus and his mother, the Virgin Mary. However, they were both fully bodily assumed into heaven, leaving leaving no physical remains on Earth. So, objects such as the crucifixion pieces, nails, parts of the cross, and the crown of thorns, and pieces of the virgin clothing are used in place of body parts. A reliquary is a container that houses the relic. Often, they are designed in such a way that allows the viewer to see the relic inside. However, there are cases where the reliquary is shaped to indicate what kind of relic is contained within. They are often decorated with a variety of precious materials.
I'm going to move past this because we're going to talk about it anyway. This is a video I do want you to see, though.
You know, Christianity was a pretty big deal during the Middle Ages. At a time when Europe was beset on all sides by heathens, the one thing uniting our dear ancestors was praising the Lord. It clearly wasn't a perfect union, considering how frequently they'd kill each other over trivial details such as whether icons were cool or not, but it was a union nonetheless. Now, one of the ways our Christian ancestors venerated the Almighty was through relics. These were objects with particular significance to Christianity, like the remains of the apostles or fragments of the true cross. These holy items were said to invoke various miracles from God, including, but not limited to, the healing of grievous wounds, the spontaneous eruption of freshwater springs, and the prevention of natural disasters. With such an incredible sales pitch, it should come as no surprise that Christians became absolutely obsessed with relics. There was one big problem, though. While Christianity grew rapidly, the supply of its relics did not. Most relics were located either in Italy or the Holy Lands, which had been under Muslim control since the 7th century, with a brief intermission from our friends, the Crusaders. Thus, for the vast majority of priests and bishops in Northern Europe, procuring a relic was really not feasible. However, if an entrepreneurial bishop could somehow secure one, he and his bishopric would stand to benefit greatly, and not just from the prestige. As soon as word got out that your church contained the remains of Saint So-and-so, you could expect an annual flood of pilgrims eager to spend their hard-earned coin in the hopes of receiving a miracle. The procurement of said relic was a task best left to the experts. These could be either crusaders returning from the Holy Land with plenty of looted, reclaimed relics, or merchants of questionable virtue who just so happened to find valuable relics in abandoned catacombs. We do know of a certain deerstoner who during the 9th century maintained his very own trade network, trafficking stolen relics from Rome to Frankfurt. Of course, since the demand for relics vastly outstripped the supply, it's highly unlikely that all of these smuggled relics were actually authentic. Indeed, if you add up all the relics of St. John the Baptist, for example, you'll conclude that he had 3 heads and 5 arms. Now, these are obvious forgeries, but there were some that were much harder to spot. Pieces of the Holy Shroud and splinters of the true cross were favorites among counterfeiters. The running gag was that there were enough splinters out there to build a warship. You might be wondering, with good cause, if counterfeiting really was this rampant, wouldn't the clergy demand some sort of proof before accepting a relic? Well, since relics did not come with certificates of authenticity, the only real way to see if the relics were genuine was if they weren't. Thus, if the blind regained their sight and the crippled started running, then the relic must have been the real deal. If that were the case, the newly healed would then also start spreading the word of this relic far and wide. And, considering the lack of printing presses and mass literacy, that was about the only marketing a relic could get. A great case study is Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury. After he was brutally murdered in his cathedral, the surrounding area saw a spurt of miracles, and everyone visiting his tomb would be healed, apparently. When word of these miracles reached the Pope in Rome, Becket was canonized as a saint, and before long, Canterbury became one of the top pilgrim destinations in Europe. Well, One of the reasons for Canterbury's enduring success was its marketing. The monks would offer vials with the blood of St. Thomas to anyone that visited. The blood was diluted with water, of course, so that there would be enough for everyone. But that was all right because its efficacy was set to remain exactly the same. It was really only with the advent of modern forensics that the forgeries finally started getting revealed. That is how we learned that the Holy Shroud, for example, actually dates from the 13th century and almost certainly didn't rest on Jesus' face. Well, that, my friends, concludes our reading of Christian relics and where to find them.
All right, so we're going to move on. So you have kind of like an idea of the of what relics are, and this is a short video explaining different types of relics.
What is it? Is it about your new relic? Yeah, I got downgraded to a second-class relic today. What does that even mean? Well, a first-class relic either interacted with the Christ or is a physical chunk of the saint, like my very real lower jaw of St. Catherine. A second-class relic is an item that a saint owned and touched, like a shrimp cocktail. Yeah. Are there third-class relics? Yes, they are anything that has touched another relic. That's a bit tenuous, don't you think? Oh, sorry, Susan. Yes, tell us about your new relic. It's St. Evelyn's old keychain. Well, at least it's practical.
All right. So this is a reliquary right here, and the relic would be inside. Once again, I want to remind you that a relic is either a piece of the person, a toe, a finger, a skull, a bone, hair of a saint or of the Virgin Mary or of Christ. And in order to protect that relic, they built a reliquary to house it. So it's a small object, usually made of fine metal, like James's flute. Oh, you said it was silver. Silver plated. Now, a relic could heal you if you went to visit it or touch it. It could shorten your time in purgatory. So it could make, I don't know if you know what purgatory is. There's heaven, there's hell, and then there's purgatory. And purgatory is a kind of halfway house between earth and heaven. So after you die, if you're not good enough to go into heaven, you're not bad enough to go into hell, you go to purgatory and you can work off your sins and eventually go to heaven. So cities and towns, let me back up. People wanted to get healed. People wanted to have a better life. So they would go and visit these relics and reliquaries. A church would have a reliquary in it, and people would come to the church to see the reliquary, and they would give money to the church so that they could see the reliquary. So this is a business for the church. The church makes money for having a relic or a reliquary inside their church. If you have a relic or a reliquary, people will come to visit and give money. And on this one, what do you think is inside this reliquary? Right, either a hand or part of the arm. And down here, there is a little door on hinges. And on certain days of the year, maybe the saint's birthday or certain holy days, that door would be open, and you'd be able to see uh, the the actual relic that is inside. This one has the skull inside of glass in the reliquary. This is the head of Mary Magdalene. Now, like the video was saying, that this opened up, if there's only a limited number of relics. And as Christianity grows, there's more and more churches. Well, more and more churches need relics, but there's only a small, limited number of relics to be had. So people start faking it. For example, a splinter from the true cross. That is the cross that Jesus died on. And in the video, it said that there's so many splinters in churches that there's enough to build a whole battleship, which is obviously much more than a cross. So there's a lot of faking it. And like I said, relics were popular, relics were necessary for churches, and whole cities would go to war over relics. And churches would steal relics from each other. So I have here a story. The bishop in Mira, this was southwestern coast of Turkey, and the city of Bari in Italy, stole his relics and brought them back to Italy. And Venice went into Alexandria and stole relics of St. Mark. So, like I said, there's theft and there's fakes. And if you took all the, I already said that. And all right, moving on. All right, I want you to know what a pilgrimage is. Write down the term pilgrimage. There's lots of relics in the Holy Land. That's Jerusalem. But that's a little bit too far of a journey for people in Europe. Well, you can go to a church and visit a relic from that Holy Land, and that would be the next best thing. So, one of the best places that has the relics is the Santiago del Compostela. And that is the most important pilgrimage site. Thousands of people will go on a pilgrimage to here. And they have the relics of St. James. St. James, the quote unquote Moor slayer, because people believed it was his relics that stopped Islam from spreading into northern Spain. And then you can see all these routes that people would take on their way to Santiago. And they would stop at other churches and look at the relics in those other churches. So if you're a church, it is good to be on these routes going to the Santiago del Compostela. And these people are basically tourists, religious tourists. And what can you do to make tourists stop in your town and spend money? So all these towns would start building big churches to attract the tourists, the pilgrims. And these towns would start collecting relics to put in their churches to have more people come to their towns and spend money and increase the economy of the place. Also, there's civic pride, like just being proud of your town. You can ridicule the neighboring town, said, haha, we have a better relic than you. More people come to see ours than yours. And that sort of a thing. With all these towns building, architects and craftsmen were moving a lot between them. And they were sharing ideas and transferring ideas. And this creates an international style. And all these churches began to look very kind of similar. And because Santiago de Compostela is so popular, it gets remade and changed. And it is not the best example of the Romanesque. It has many, many changes to it. But on the inside, it is Romanesque. On the outside, it is Baroque. But I do want to point out, notice the two tall towers at the beginning or at the facade. What would you call that? Westwork. Also, this church is very close to the sea, and people, when they visit this church, they would also take a trip to the sea and collect shells. So, shells are a big part of the pilgrimage to Santiago del Compostela, and there were even shells in the architecture itself, shells embedded into the walls. So when you see religious leaders having a shell on their person, that is a reference to the pilgrimage to Santiago del Compostela. So people would go and have many adventures along the way to get to the church. They would venerate the relics, they would pray, they would go to the seashore, they would pick up a local seashell only found here and wear it around their neck on the way back home. And that was proof that you went there. It's kind of like going to Disneyland and buying a Disneyland t shirt. And people still go, people still get seashells. And Pope Benedict the 16th is still a fan of the medieval traditions, made the pilgrimage himself. And you can see it in sculptures. If you look closely at his bag that he has a shell on it right there. Okay, so let's take a look at the architecture of the Romanesque period. All right. So this is what the basilica looked like before the Romanesque period. This is similar to that of Old St. Peter's, where you'd have the atrium. That is the open area that is in front of the church. The narthex is the entrance to the church. The nave is the center of the church. The aisles are on the outside, and then we have the apse on the far end. The apse would be on the eastern end. The entrance would be on the western end. That's why it's called a westwork. Now, a Romanesque church is a lot more advanced and a lot more complicated than the late antique churches like Old St. Peter's. All right, I want you to know what a nave is. That is the center area. I want you to know what the aisle is. I want you to know what a transept is. I want you to know what a crossing is. I want you to know what the ambulatory is and the radiating chapels. Make sure you get all these terms. Are we done writing down these terms? Anybody need more time? So, same terms, all right, but we're seeing it from the outside. This is like the west work, all right? If we look at this is the west side of the church. This is the main entrance. and we have these two bell towers at the front of the church. When you walk in, we can see the nave down there with the aisles on either sides. And yes, it does have a clear story. Above the crossing would be another tower. The ambulatory goes around the apse. You remember the apse from the previous basilicas. And then there are radiating chapels around here. I'll explain all of this in a second. So, once again, this is the old style of the basilica plan. And what would happen was, let's say this is Old St. Peter's Basilica, and the altar is built right on top of the tomb of St. Peter. Well, people would want to come and venerate St. Peter and like pray to him and therefore solve their problems. So lots of people would come and visit St. Peter's grave or the altar and venerate and then move on. So that's kind of why the transept, or that's exactly why the transept was built, so that the people didn't have to come in through the front entrance. They came in through the side entrance. They would venerate St. Peter and then move on and out. But this disturbed and disrupted the services. All right, so now people come in and they come in through the transept, and there are these little tiny little chapels, these radiating chapels right here. And each single one of them, there would be a relic, and the people will come in from the outside through the transept, visit each of these relics, pray to them, and then move on. While inside the apse right here, the service was continuing and they were not being bothered. All right, they weren't being interrupted. And let me go through my looks to see what we got. Yeah, the pilgrims are coming from all over Europe, and they wouldn't tell, they wouldn't know when they were arriving. You couldn't really, they didn't have phones. You couldn't really call ahead, so they would arrive at all times of the day, and they could be during the services. So they built this ambulatory so that they could go around the service instead of going through the service. So it was born out of a need to accommodate for the locals as well as the pilgrims that were visiting. And there's a phrase here: if one relic is good, then many relics are better. So each chapel gets an altar with a reliquary, and the smaller apses are called apsidals. That's not going to be on the test though. And we can see that red line is the path of the pilgrims. All right. And then on the outside of the church, you can see those radiating chapels all the way around. So before the Romanesque, it was very simple. It was basic, and I think we were looking at the ceiling here. The nave is taller than aisles, and the upper portion is called a gallery. That's where the clear story is. All right, so notice the ceiling is flat across, but this is the big thing for the Romanesque churches. Remember how I told you Byzantine has that gold background? The way you can identify Romanesque is these barrel vault in the nave. And this is the reference to Roman architecture. That barrel vault, we have the cross vault. I showed you guys this before. And so in Romanesque churches, we have the barrel vaults, and then the arches are line up with the pillars that support that weight. We have engaged columns right there. And the columns connected to the arches to support the weight. So here we have the pillars or the columns, and they refer to and they do these arches that run vertically down the aisles. All right, and a typical Romanesque church has three towers: the two on the westwork, and then one at the crossing. And I want you to know these terms too. Some Romanesque churches have a mute facade, and some have a speaking facade. The mute facade is plain. The speaking facade has tons of stuff on it. All kinds of decorations. All right, and we're going to stop with the portal for next time. Are there any questions about anything? If you are still working on the soft chalks, I would like you to be finished with up to chapter 12 of the soft chalks by this afternoon. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and look at if you have done, and I will start at 3 o'clock. I'm going to go into D2L and look for, if you've done up to chapter 8, now I'm going to look for chapters 9, 10, and 11, and 12 in the soft chalks. All right, so get those done today. All right. And if you have all of them done, it's 100. If not, it's a 0.